This is What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
I'm Andy Georgeson.
And I'm Chris Bell.
James Campbell is
laboring elsewhere.
Laboring elsewhere again.
Isn't he at the Jazz Festival?
Detroit Jazz Festival. Yeah. So we'll just move on without him. I think it'll be fine. You are? You didn't miss him last time.
I know, so I'm making up for it today.
What's Left America is produced by Left Out Media and brought to you by the generosity of our sponsors and friends like the Houston Federation of Teachers, Local 2415, AFL-CIO, and Stoli Vodka, and hopefully someday friends just like you. You know, today on the show we're going to cover 4 great topics. Trump cancels Christmas, the plot to keep Trump accountable, NAFTA 2.0, and Mueller's death by 1,000 cuts. And, of course, we'll finish the show just like always with Out of Left Field. Let's get started immediately. Trump cancels Christmas. Citing budget constraints, Trump notified Congress that he's canceling a pay raise of 2.1% set to go in effect in January for most of the civilian federal employees. In his announcement, he said, "We must maintain efforts to put our nation on a I'm sorry, I can't read this without laughing. We must maintain efforts to put our nation on a fiscally sustainable course, and federal agency budgets cannot sustain such increases." I wonder why, Mr. President.
It couldn't have anything to do with the tax cuts.
Tax cut that created a $1 trillion deficit, unfunded again.
But I'm trying to figure out what level of pettiness led to this particular decision. Just a all-out dislike for federal employees?
Or I guess within 2 months from the midterm elections, he wanted to ensure increased Democratic voters.
Well...
that is a good question, Chris Bell. I think I see that you're trying to move the ball down the field with this because, you know, it's obvious on his face, that this is a terrible move. It's apolitical. It doesn't make sense politically. It's mean-spirited, but that's par for the course for him, right? I don't know what else.
Well, I would understand it.
Usually you can identify why he's being so damn petty, I think is what Chris is saying.
I guess he's formulated in his mind that almost all of the federal bureaucracy is made up
deep state
of Democrats, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's been formulated over years, and both parties are well represented, and they're the people that do the day in and day out work that keeps our country moving forward and obviously keeps the government.
Well, he said when he was talking about it, he said that he wants a federal workforce that is made up of critical skill sets and high skilled labor, and so that's why he's canceling this because they need to be more accountable. What he's doing is he's canceling a pay raise. Really, it's just a cost of living raise for janitors and AC people and people that are living paycheck to paycheck that can't afford the.
But I didn't get that, Chris. So the skilled employees are still going to get a raise?
No. What I'm saying is when he's announcing that what we want is a skilled workforce, but in canceling this pay raise, it's everybody that loses this pay raise, the entire workforce. And so the janitors who can't afford to pay for their health care that's gone up 1,000% in the last 2 years because of what the government's done, they're losing the pay raise too.
Well, focus on that if you want to. If you want to go through and really do an audit of government jobs, I'm sure you're going to find some waste and some jobs that are no longer necessary, just like if any company were to do that in this day and age, you would find some replaceable individuals. But just to do this across the board at this particular time when people are probably counting on this pay raise and need a pay raise just like everybody else in the United States is just another demonstration of his incredible pettiness and his incredible lack of respect for anyone that isn't a billionaire.
It's amazing to me. Someone who's never lacked for anything, wanted for anything his entire life, has no understanding of what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck.
And which is kind of strange because most people that I know from the Lucky Sperm Club that get into public service do try to at least fake it sometimes.
Yeah, I don't think that his run for president was his getting into public service.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't. He's no, RFK.
You're not seeing a lot of public service from this.
No, I'm really not. But the thing that puzzles me is that so many moves that are part of the Republican agenda have to do with just this kind of thing. I can never think of the guy's name that wanted to shrink the government down to the size that it could be drowned.
Ross Perot.
No, drowned in a bathtub.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know, right? But we'll think of it anyway.
That's so great that we've forgotten his name.
It is kind of great, but he's part of the administration now.
That's not great.
No, I know. No, okay, so we're getting off time. So
let's make America great again.
Shrinking government is a Republican principle, and I guess if you take it, play this out to its logical conclusion, not increasing salaries is part of shrinking government, and the point that I want to make is that Republicans, including the base that voted for Trump, knows that this is the game plan, and they vote for him anyway, and they continue to vote for state legislators who cut spending on education and healthcare and the kinds of things that the poorest people really need. So I don't understand whether this would have an effect or not, or why.
But it does prompt a larger discussion, because I think when people like Trump do things like this or others suggest things, it's the huge disconnect between the very wealthy in our society and the middle class, if there is such a thing anymore, and the lower income individuals. And they don't realize what was it, a 2.1% increase
2.1%, which
that was scheduled for January.
It's barely going to hit the cost of living.
Right, and it's very little, but it's a lot.
Right.
And when you're not making very much
money. Especially when you look at the fact that the federal minimum wage has not been raised in 9 years, because the Republicans have blocked it for the last 9 years. Barack Obama and one other president have been the only presidents in 50 years who have not raised the federal minimum wage. Obama tried, but the Republicans wouldn't let him. And so there's only been 2 presidents who have not raised the federal minimum wage since its inception during their presidency. 9 years we've gone without raising it. Donald Trump said during the campaign that he does not know how people can live on the minimum wage at the rate it's at. $7.10 an hour, I think, is what it's at. And he does not.
It's different in every state, though.
Well, yeah,
the federal minimum wage.
Federal minimum wage is $7.10 an hour, and Donald Trump said during the campaign he does not know how people can live on that, but yet he's blocking a pay raise
for people who are not making a whole lot of money.
Right.
It's
stunning to me.
I mean, not all of them. I mean, I'm sure some federal employees are well paid, but many are not, and it's just sort of. I think the minimum wage probably is it's probably going to come up a couple of times in today's podcast, because we're going to talk about NAFTA as well, and that was one really good thing to come out of those talks. But the issue has been around forever, and when I was in Congress, I tried to propose a bill that said that if you increase congressional salaries, then you had to increase the minimum wage as well, because I thought maybe members of Congress wouldn't even be hypocritical enough not to support such a bill. I thought it was rather clever. Of course, it went nowhere. But the idea and the initiative has been around for quite some time and needs to continue. And I think we're finally getting that point where people are waking up as to what it might actually take to pay rent, put food on the table, and all the other things.
Well, not according to the Republicans.
I want to, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour.
25 cents.
Yeah,
okay.
That's okay. And so now,
well, you just gave him a raise right there.
Yeah, I gave him a raise, so I'm better than 2 presidents. So the talk now is that let the states set their own minimum wages.
Well, that was
some
a pun.
Some states already do, but I think that we can be pretty sure that it'll be the more progressive states, the more enlightened states, that will raise wages, and the South and the Midwest and some other parts of the country, the red states, will not.
Right.
And then we'll have this continuing downward spiral of a population that is not well educated, not well paid. You can work, 2.5 jobs and still need a food pantry to survive. And that's pretty pathetic.
Well, there's just 2 points here that I want to bring up before we move on. Donald Trump said during the campaign that he wants the federal minimum wage canceled and he wants the states to compete over the minimum wage, that states should be competing with each other over their own minimum wage. Is that a good idea, or does it make workers treated like a bale of cotton?
Yeah,
well, it's
we're sort of
completely
doing that
stupid,
now.
and it goes back to something a debate we've had in Houston for a long time, and that is, at one point, the city of Houston contemplated passing a higher minimum wage. Well, it becomes very detrimental to one entity, especially in a city like Houston, where you have all these outlying areas that would not have to pass a higher minimum wage. And so what do the businesses do? They just start they move out. And so no, it should be done on across the board federal level, and we should get serious about this. And I don't understand. I would encourage anyone who is listening to the podcast to do the math and take that $7.25 and multiply it by 8 hours, and multiply it by 5, maybe 4, because that's another trick a lot of them are using now, not to give them a full schedule.
Right.
And
see make them part-time so they don't have to give them health insurance.
Right. So, and see what that works out to. And it's pretty miserable.
One more point, we're going to move on. Representative Duncan Hunter, Republican from California, everybody remembers him. He just got indicted for using campaign money to support his lifestyle. He said, and I love this, after he got indicted, he's been saying this for several years, he told Martha McCallum, on Fox News host from San Diego, I mean, $174,000 per year is what a member of Congress makes. Do you think they should make more than that? It's not enough to live on. It depends. It depends on where you live. It's difficult to live in a place like.
Well, at least he's not out of touch.
It's difficult to live in a place like San Francisco, San Diego, New York, or D.C., said Hunter, whose district is parts of San Diego. It's probably easier to live in Kansas or Missouri. It's all relative. In California, the average mean income is $64,000 per year, and he has been voting against raising the minimum wage.
Well, look, I'm not totally unsympathetic to what he's saying, because it is true that San Francisco has an incredibly high cost of living, and you have to live in your district to represent your district. And so you don't have to live as a member of Congress? Well,
but politically,
okay.
It's not.
It's a good idea.
At least nearby, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't look really good if you don't.
Well, I didn't know that you actually did not have to, but be that as it may, certain parts of the country have far higher cost of living than other parts of the country. $7.25 an hour full-time, if you have 2 weeks off, unpaid, works out to $14,500 a year.
Well, I don't know where he was working, or where he was living, but they did put that in to where you don't have to live in your district, so that they could live in D.C.
Oh,
and
okay,
so he could basically rent a place in D.C. and then not have a home in wherever he lives. And
but that's not the point. The
point is, also he shouldn't. If that was the situation, then he shouldn't have run for Congress. And it's also somewhat ridiculous, because you also have to keep in mind that there are other things that you don't have to worry about, like gas money and
travel,
the cost of your car and travel and everything else, because that's all taken care of in your congressional budget. He was stealing, and he's trying to make an excuse for stealing. Of course.
That is the point. Now, most members of Congress, unless they have their family with them in Washington, are still going to have the cost of another home wherever in their home district. But I'm not trying to defend him. I was trying to make the point that it doesn't really matter that stealing,
and the housing is not covered, and we should point that out, and that does become somewhat challenging. But there is very affordable housing in Washington, D.C., and which you can get in addition to what you're paying back at home.
You can live under your desk in your office.
And as many do.
Well, that's gross. But anyway,
I brought it up because this guy votes against raising the federal minimum wage while stealing money out of his
and making
out
$175,000 a year.
a year. Yeah.
Which works out to a lot more when you put in everything that you
Yeah,
really can
he
pay
makes
for.
double.
Meals and other things. If anything's connected to your political race, you can pay for that out of your, political fund and what have you. And so that's just complete bullshit.
Yeah.
Just the other idea about competing in terms of minimum wage, I guess, you sort of think about it in terms of some locations raising the minimum wage to attract workers. But, we in Texas and other places, especially in the South, like to compete on low wages to attract businesses. So we don't charge them, we give them all these tax breaks. We promise them a workforce that you can pay minimum wage.
That you can abuse.
And and right to work. And so I think that all states are not going to be in the middle of a race to the top. There'll be
a race to the
some
bottom.
will be-
A race to the
huge,
bottom.
Yes.
Huge business community here in Texas that's so pro-immigration reform. All for the wrong reasons, but
we have
politics
it.
makes strange bedfellows.
But it's our policy. We have it. All right, let's move on. The plot to keep Trump accountable. This is absolutely amazing. The Republicans are actually running on a campaign that if Democrats take control of the House, they will impose real oversight over Donald Trump. Those bastards. Axios reported last week on a memo circulating among alarmed House Republicans who laid out a list of investigations that Democrats might actually undertake if they take control of the House. Getting access to Trump's tax returns, trying to force more transparency around Trump's business holdings, trying to determine the extent of revenue going into his pockets, among other things. What the hell are they thinking?
I'm grateful. I'm glad we have the list. Thank you.
That just cracked me up. They're actually going out and telling voters, you have to vote for us because the Democrats are going to investigate the president.
Yeah, well, it's ugly when you look under that rock. So I get that, but I appreciate the memo.
But also, frighteningly, though, that's how powerful they feel that he has become with his base, that the minute they hear that, they'll just become so electrified and energized that they will just do whatever is necessary to keep
To
that
hold on
from
to power.
happening.
Right, to hold on to power.
Which, I mean, we've talked about a lot, but it's just the horribly frightening thing about this administration. I mean, everything about our government is supposed to be built upon checks and balances. And when you say, okay, look, we cannot have that anymore.
We don't need checks.
We need a Congress that will just check that box,
Right.
and check that box, and check that
Blank
box.
check.
And with no balance. Even Fox News always tried to be fair and balanced. Y'all may disagree.
We do. I listened to a podcast that the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal does, and during the campaign, I used to talk to my friends about the editorial being 100% in the tank for Trump, and I just could not understand it. It didn't make sense. And then after the election, they would make excuses and try to rationalize some of his behavior and some of his policy proposals and his whatever he was doing. It didn't matter how bad or irrational it was. They had a reason that this was A-OK. Now, the board seems to treat him like he's irrelevant, and they just talk all around him about the Republican Congress and the confirmation of Kavanaugh, and if the president's name comes up, but it's always in the context sort of and then of course there's the president, but it doesn't really matter. He's not a factor in any of this, and I think that this memo is sort of along those same lines. It doesn't really matter if this memo is leaked. It's not going to make any difference. It really is. If the Russia investigation is irrelevant to the voters, if the fact that Barack Obama's Supreme Court nominee didn't get a hearing is irrelevant, if Kavanaugh holding back, or if the committee,
The Senate committee.
The Senate committee holding back 10,000 documents dealing with this Supreme Court nominee is irrelevant, it's going to be hard to figure out what is going to matter.
But they're caught in this extraordinary vice where they can't come out against him. because if you have 35% of the voters in your district that support him, regardless of anything he says or does, you know that if you come out against him, then they will immediately be opposed to you because they treat him almost like a godhead.
Right.
That's the why of what I'm talking
So they
about.
can't, and so they can't come out against him, and then these folks who are in districts like we've seen here in Texas, where they know that Hillary Clinton carried certain
Urban areas,
certain districts, then it's like a really horrible situation for them because they can't turn against him. Ted Cruz is in the vice as well because here in Texas he has to support Donald Trump. He cannot afford to lose that base. Meanwhile, who knows? I mean,
so you're feeling bad for Ted?
I'm not.
You're feeling bad, like his soul hurts.
Oh
that he...
no! I think he's more deplorable than Trump in most respects, and so no, not at all. But I just think it's kind of hilarious that he has to go. There's an article in today's Houston Chronicle about him having to go and sign "Make America Great" hats, and I mean, how that just must
eat away.
Be like a knife going into his body every time the ink hits the hat. I mean, it's
Trump
incredible.
has insulted every last one of them, and they all go and kiss his ass anyway.
And and speaking of that, in a meeting last week with the evangelical leaders, the sleeping evangelical leaders, Trump really told us, everybody, what his plan is to win the midterms.
Now, why do you call them sleeping?
Because they don't do anything. They don't hold him accountable. If any other leader was in the White House that acted half the way Donald Trump acts, they'd be all over him. They would be they'd be in the pulpit every week blasting him. They'd be calling press conferences blasting him. Instead, they prop this guy up. And
He's a Republican, Chris.
But they're asleep at the wheel.
God,
they would not.
You just don't
they
understand.
would not.
God forgives Republicans
They
for
would
any
not.
of their bad acts.
They would not put up with this from
And
another Republican.
You just can't accept that, I think.
So his plan, he announced to these to the sleeping evangelicals that his plan is to sow fear and rioting to win the midterms. Then when he said that if the Democrats win, they warned the evangelical leaders, they will overturn everything that we've done, and they will do it quickly and violently. They will end everything immediately, Trump said. When you look at Antifa, he added the term that describes militant leftist groups.
I don't think that he was threatening violence. I think that he was accusing the Democrats of resorting to violence.
What's the difference?
Well, can we, as a tribute to James Campbell, can we just say that was a dog whistle?
That was a dog whistle. Yes, we have to acknowledge it was a dog whistle.
As I told Andy this week that I was driving to work and I heard on NPR one of the commentators say dog whistle, and I nearly drove off the road.
I heard the same thing.
Yes.
Yes.
The thing about it is,
we're becoming so mainstream.
I think that we've forgotten what a dog whistle is. A dog whistle is a silent
It's a silent whistle that signals people to what you want them to think, but you're not going to say.
Okay, but thank you for mansplaining dog whistle to me.
Did I mansplain?
I was about to.
Is that like manscaping?
A dog whistle, an actual literal dog whistle, is a silent to human. The dogs can hear it. In politics, it's supposed to be silent. These aren't dog whistles. He is saying he's using his words. He's using his words to tell the base, these radicals, these black people, these football players,
it's a bullhorn.
Yeah,
it's not
a
dog
bullhorn.
whistle.
Because he knows that it's about to change. The House is going to become Democratic. I think that's becoming clearer and clearer by the day.
I don't
Senate
see any way to
probably
stop
won't.
that.
Huh?
I don't see any way that the Republicans can hold the House.
And so he sees what's coming, and the heyday is ending. And so if he has nothing but being repugnant and no longer can get his awful legislation passed, then
yeah. So he's warning of violence.
It all kind of goes asunder.
He's warning of violence, but that memo speaks to what his real fear is, which is that the Democrats are going to open a bunch of investigations.
Right.
So
That's exactly right.
But what else is going to happen? Because we should not be running The Democrats should not be running on impeachment.
No.
They shouldn't be running on investigations. So investigations should occur, to be sure, but what does a flipped House need to really be doing? Because I think that if we just focus on, if Democratic lawmakers just focus on investigating Trump and trying to begin impeachment proceedings, that is going to be very bad for us in 2020.
They're not. And I think what you're going to find in a lot of these districts where no one has been challenged in years, we're seeing this here in Houston in the Lizzie Fletcher, John Culberson race, where they're uncovering stuff about what Culberson has been doing with his political fund and buying these donor gifts and apparently made $1 million selling historical items and stuff. Someone who went to Congress with nothing, but they're bringing up issues and those races, Andy, are going to be local. And I think the Democrats are smart about that, and they're going to focus on the issues that matter to Democrats.
I'm
and that's
talking
what
about
got
once they are in Congress. What are we going to be doing in the Congress?
So
that's what we need to be talking about, and not let them have the set the agenda for what the Democrats are going to be doing in Congress.
I don't have a problem
talking about it.
I don't have a problem leading up to the election if the Democrats are running on accountability. I do have a problem if they're running on impeachment. And we're going to hold, for the first time, we're going to hold the Republicans accountable for what they've been doing. That's a good theme for the Democrats to run on, along with fixing the things that the Republicans have screwed up over the last 15 years.
And sadly, when we get back in power, I mean, they have to start
doing it,
redoing what was done in the Obama administration that they've spent so much time undoing. And so all the issues, what's sad, it doesn't change.
Right.
And it doesn't change. It's health care and it's employment.
But the problem is if we only get
wage, it's immigration.
If the Democrats only get the House, the only thing that's going to happen is everything will stop. It's not that things will change for the positive. It's that the bad stuff will at least stop. And so you'll see Trump do what Obama did. If Congress won't act, I'll do it on my own, and he'll just start making more executive orders than he's already making. And that's all he'll be able to do because he can't get any legislation passed. That's what's going to happen.
And I will say this, and people say, oh, that's bullshit. Look at Bill Clinton and what they did for him. But we already discussed the whole impeachment scenario last week, but I don't.
It's 67 votes, by the way.
Yeah, Andy reminded us of that because she got in that little computer and figured it out.
Out of my brain.
But so I don't think I don't think the Democrats would have ever gone along with this if the tables were turned and we had a president this ridiculous and so against the grain of everything that people believed. I think people would just started crying out.
I agree.
Immediately. I just can't believe the way they will march in lockstep.
I don't think the Democratic Party ever would have nominated somebody this crazy. I
would hope not. I just don't think it would. You never know.
Yeah. I think the problem, I don't know. It seems like to me that now that Trump won the nomination, then won the presidency, that there's just going to be a lot of crazy seeking the presidency from here on out. Now he made the ridiculous seem completely plausible.
I don't know if we're going to talk about that today, but what's interesting, it seems like more stable-minded folks are also thinking about it again. This morning, it certainly sounded on Sunday morning television like John Kerry will strongly consider a run for the presidency in 2020, 74 years old. But look, I mean, that's not that old anymore.
Yeah, not in today's presidential runs.
Sounded great, and I'm sure I'll hear about this too. But I thought I was so hopeful that he would win against George Bush.
Oh, I remember going to bed thinking he had one. Well, not that he had one, but that I'd wake up and he'd be the president. And it's so weird.
I think Joe Biden is seriously considering.
Joe Biden, I think, is very much in the hunt, and I think it'll be a very interesting discussion because I know there are a lot of Andy and a lot of my friends think, oh, it's all about younger. Well, let's talk about it. Maybe it's about experience. Maybe it's about statesmanship. Maybe it's about a lot of things that we've seen over this weekend.
I was really impressed with that young Kennedy the representative, the young Kennedy. I can't think of his name now.
Oh, the
Patrick?
the
Patrick
redhead?
Kennedy. Yeah. I was pretty impressed with the last speech I saw him give, and I'm here to talk about him, but it's hard to come from the House to run for president. Has been.
I was really speaking more on the other side, the crazy on the other side.
Oh.
I mean,
Crazy train.
yeah, but whatever. I guess. Anyway, what's next?
Let's go to NAFTA. NAFTA 2.0. The Trump administration, you remember Donald Trump, you remember him. He's the president.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we talked about him a little bit. He famously said that NAFTA was the worst trade deal ever entered into by the United States. That's, of course, after the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was the first worst trade deal we ever got into. And then, of course, the Paris Climate Accord was the worst deal we ever got into. And there was another worst deal we ever got into. I can't remember what the other
They're
one
all
was.
the worst.
They're all the worst. So anyway,
Some of his marriages.
all of those, said he was going to pull us out of NAFTA. Hasn't pulled us out yet, but said he was. Started renegotiating with Mexico. Cut a preliminary deal with Mexico last week surrounding digital economy, automobiles, agriculture, and labor unions. Cut Canada out, and then they started negotiating with Canada. Friday, Canada just walked out, said we're not doing it. It's over. It was over a comment that Donald Trump made about Canada, saying that they're going to do what I want. Canada walked out of the deal.
Good for Canada. Good. Well, but you know what? Actually, the thing about it is there are some things in this. First of all, it's not a repeal of NAFTA at all.
It's just a
tweak.
modification.
Yeah, and some of the modifications are good.
Right.
I'm so disappointed, Andy. We were sitting here looking at each other. We both were thinking the
Same
same thing.
But both of us have the good sense not to say it.
No, I don't.
You don't. Go ahead then.
People have been threatening to pull out forever and not doing it. So.
Oh, see, I was going to go a different direction. I was thinking that,
What makes you think Andy would be thinking of that line?
We looked at each other immediately when you said that.
I was trying to think of Tiffany's mother's name about that she said, well, you said you were going to pull out of that deal. Okay. Anyway, whatever.
I guess we are going to get that explicit rating this week.
When I was growing up, they would discuss the methods of contraception.
But then he started talking about digital.
One was the skeet method.
Or digits.
Pull! Anyway, so yes, it was on my mind when he was saying it, and it seemed to be on.
I wasn't thinking about that until you sent. Until you passed me that note.
Okay, NAFTA has nothing to do with contraception or sex, so let's get back to NAFTA.
Yeah, but it makes the podcast funnier. Okay, let's go. Andy,
I thought it stood for
on a serious
no
note.
ass fucking. I can't remember the last two letters. Oh, tits and ass. The thing about this is that it's not a repeal of NAFTA, but it is a tweaking, and some of the tweaks are good, and they have to do with higher wages and some workforce.
He actually did some things that are going to help unions, which is very strange.
Yes, it's gonna. But I'm not sure. I didn't really get to dig down too deep in the weeds enough to understand why sort of Mexico was really on board with this, because they stand to lose some business. Some of these maquiladoras may close and the work may come back over here, which is fine. But also.
But apparently not.
Apparently,
it's just sort of like
at the end of the day, Mexico needs
modernizing.
Yeah, it's fine.
Bringing NAFTA up to the modern age.
Well, there are things that there are things that needed to happen with NAFTA, and frankly, I remember being on the editorial board of the Houston Chronicle and arguing for NAFTA because I thought that as this factory work moved south, that, you would start with these super low wages, $3 a day and, what have you. But then the Mexican workers would unionize and they would sort of go through the industrial revolution that we went through and workplace, protections and rights and higher wages. But that never really seemed to happen.
But
So
let me just throw this out, since this is a political podcast, that he throws this out, and you throw a lot of things out on the campaign trail, and it's not just him. I mean, I think everybody who runs for president throws things out that they don't end up doing because they realize that what the consequences are going to be. And in this particular instance, NAFTA is very important to the state of Texas. And if nobody's noticed, Texas is rather large in the Republican column. And if he screwed over all the people who depend on NAFTA, the energy companies and everybody else, then that was going to be pretty hard to answer to. And so I think they started taking a different tack and just found a way to sort of work it out. And now, they're talking about Canada not joining. I think, and it's interesting because diplomacy, we've talked about it on here, how you handle things. I'm sure the only reason they're doing that, I have a feeling they're going to end up.
They're going to
joining in the pack.
They'll be in.
But if you just treat people like shit, then they have a tendency to not want to just bend over for you.
Yeah. Well, you almost made it sound like Trump had come to the conclusion after much study that we needed NAFTA. And, no, Trump is just saying whatever is top of mind. He just spouts off. And he's had these couple of ticks about NAFTA, trade and some things that he just has had wrong for years and years and years.
But Andy, the whole reason he went after it to begin with was sort of strange. It was
what?
The whole reason he went after it to begin with, I thought was sort of strange because the people who've been most critical of NAFTA back when I was actively engaged and running with the union, labor hated it. So like you pointed out, Chris, they are getting a lot better deal. They should be pretty pleased. I hope.
I would think that they are. At the end of the day, Canada's going to come back into this thing. There's three things that need to happen to get Canada back in there. The dairy, for the United States standpoint, the dairy issue, the high tariffs they charge on dairy, dispute resolution problems, and Trump's steel tariffs, and that's what But they walked out because Trump basically said, Canada's my bitch and they'll do what I want. That's my paraphrase. And they said, you know what, we're not doing this. And they walked out on the deal. For
now.
Yeah. Do you blame them?
No. No.
And it was Donald Trump's Friday deadline that he just made up. You're going to do this by Friday or it's over. Okay, see ya.
But again, Trump really is pretty irrelevant to this process. I mean, he sort of gets these things going by tweeting about them, and then people have to start moving. People who actually have information and know what's going on start talking to each other, and then they work things out.
Well, we hope. we can all hope springs eternal in that respect.
That's not right. You're absolutely right, because in a lot of areas that's absolutely not true. Trump has no idea what's going on, and the EPA, and doesn't care. EPA, Education Department,
and there's so
housing,
much going on. People don't
and
follow
a lot
it.
is going
North Korea.
wrong.
That's exactly right, and I think that's really the end game here. Is you get so much chaos going on that, and that's going to be my left field today. You get so much chaos going on that there's things happening every day that we don't get to see.
Well, North Korea, there was a great article this week about the fact that they're not abiding by anything that was talked about. But are we even talking about it?
Right.
No.
And the president in this way off with North Korea, but the president in an interview this week with a reporter is still saying, "I fixed North Korea." He's still telling people, "I fixed that whole problem" with that one meeting. So
well. My plumber downstairs is still saying he fixed that bathroom back there.
And we know that that's not true. All right. Let's move on. Mueller's death by 1,000 cuts. You'd have to be in a coma to not know Donald Trump's disdain for the Robert Mueller investigation. I think it's better described personally as Trump's fear of the Robert Mueller investigation. His anger at Attorney General Jeff Sessions started as soon as Sessions was sworn in as Attorney General, because he declared his conflict of interest with respect to it and recused himself and put, what's his name? Rosenstein in charge of the investigation. That angered Donald Trump from the beginning. Sessions has been in trouble ever since. been on the firing on the not on the firing block, but on the chopping block, and Trump has attacked him for a year and a half now. And I thought this was you've seen this coming. Donald Trump announced last week that Sessions is safe until November, and now Lindsey Graham is giving Donald Trump cover for it. And I think Sessions is gone in November.
Well, that means that Mueller better start handing down some indictments.
By policy, he has to wait until after the election now. By the DOJ policy, he has to wait until after the election if he's going to follow policy.
Are we in the window
Yeah,
now?
it started September 1st.
Well, it will be probably a death by 1,000 cuts, and that's how things usually play out in Washington, having been engaged in some of that process in the past. And I think Mueller is proving to be quite brilliant. And, there's just a possibility he may be a little bit smarter than Donald Trump.
Oh, there's no question about that. This isn't in my notes because I just saw it this morning. Mueller got a guy out of, the guy that just lost his case.
In what case?
Manafort's office to plead guilty to a case where he admitted that they took $50,000 from a Russian oligarch to get 4 tickets to go to the to Trump's inauguration, and they gave the money directly to the inaugural committee, and that's straight up that was straight up illegal.
The problem with 1,000 cuts is that it's just not satisfying. It's not I feel like we need a death blow, it's not going to matter.
No, I think that's coming, and I think they're putting together some pretty strong cases, and it seems like a foregone conclusion based on everything I've read that Trump Jr. is about to come under indictment. I don't see how Jared Kushner avoids it.
What Donald Trump's trying to do is beat him to the punch. I mean, he's going to get rid of Sessions in November as soon as the election's over. He announced the other day on Twitter without talking to John McGahn that he's gone.
But he didn't beat McGahn to the punch. McGahn was already cooperating with them and talking with them.
But that's when
Lord
he did
knows what he shared.
He did it when he found out McGahn had talked to him for 30 hours. He had no idea what McGahn was doing. And when he found that out, he fired him.
Well, and he thought McGahn was helping him.
Right.
And all the reports is that McGahn figured out that he was maybe going to get played.
Right.
And so he turned state's evidence, basically.
Yeah. And he fired him 11 days after he found out. And that was over the objection of several of his insiders saying, you can't do this. Donald Trump doesn't care. He did it anyway. This is all coming to a head. I think as soon as this election's over, if Trump can find the people to do it, he's going to fire Mueller. If he can't find the people to do it, Mueller's going to get the indictments. This is going to happen as soon as this election's over. This is coming to a head.
Yeah. Well, last time Rod Rosenstein threatened to quit when Trump wanted to fire Mueller, and I just wonder how that dynamic is going to play out. If he fires Sessions, then first of all, who's going to take that job as Attorney General? Who would want that job? But
everything's coming to a head because at some point, when his support dips to the record low and people are no longer fearful, kind of backtracking on what we were talking about earlier, then it's all over.
When is that support going to dip to the record low?
I don't know.
I mean, it's already dipped to a record low.
But we talked about that. I mean, if Nixon could maintain a 25% approval rating even after he resigned, then Trump will always have something probably in that neighborhood.
That area.
But when it flips, it flips.
But you got to look at this. If I'm right, with the removal of Sessions and McGahn, that leaves no one standing in the way of the removal of Rod Rosenstein. And once that happens, Mueller's gone. I mean, then he can fire Mueller.
But then there's always impeachment. But
without a report.
Well, none of this is going to happen until after the election. So
right.
It's all coming down.
This is going to be a very interesting lead up to the election.
The tarot cards in this particular situation are somewhat difficult to read, but as far as the ultimate outcome, I don't think
that's the thing I really respect. I'm sorry about that.
I really talk about tarot cards.
Yeah, I do. I respect that a lot. No, I really. That's thing I really respect about Robert Mueller is the way he has handled this by being so professional about it. If you think back to the Ken Starr investigation with his press conferences every day and his power grabs and the way he handled it, the dynamic between the way these two men handle these investigations is stunning.
Robert Mueller is a Princeton graduate and a Vietnam hero who's done incredible public service.
And Ken
and
Starr
both sides
got fired from Baylor.
Like he's phenomenal. And so for Donald Trump to think that he's really going to play this guy,
but Donald Trump played a 17 other people that he was running against in the Republican
they
primary.
weren't Robert Mueller.
Okay, well, oh my God, I just don't know if Robert Mueller is going to be the god of all of this. He, honestly, I don't. Everyone knows I don't like.
Chris Tritico deals with the federal government on a regular basis, and they are not to be toyed with.
No, they are not. They are not. This is. I'm really this is sounds kind of sick, but when you do what I do for a living, you deal in sick all the time. But this is very entertaining to watch. It's incredible to watch this thing play itself out with the way that the Trump administration and his private lawyers are handling this, and watch Mueller and the dance that they're having. It's really amazing.
The thing about it is that Trump, just by his lack of mores and willingness to say anything, and not following norms or traditions, has outfoxed, outflanked people who are almost everyone is much smarter than he is, and yet, people who are staying in their lanes don't really have the weapons to fight the guy who's at the top of government with a Twitter account. Right. So
luckily Mueller has the weapons.
Yeah, he's got a grand jury.
Well, what's going to happen between
pretty strong weapon, kind of the bazooka.
After Election Day on November 6th and before the new members of the House are seated, there's some time in between there where a lot of damage can be done.
Well, there's the DOJ policy says that they can't do anything publicly during that 60 days before the election. That doesn't mean Mueller can't be going to a grand jury. That's a secret process. And they've gotten all these indictments that we had no idea they were going to the grand jury.
And really,
he could have the indictment ready.
If they start playing that game, Andy, where they try to stay in session for multiple weeks before the holiday, people be raising so many questions. I wouldn't put it past them. I'm with you. I wouldn't put it past them. But traditionally, people come back after Thanksgiving. You have a few votes, and then they're gone.
Right. Yeah, if they're going to try that recess appointment game, the Democrats will keep the Senate in session the whole time, just like the Republicans did to Obama.
I'm speaking of what the administration is going to be doing, doing during that time. And then the DOJ policy is going to fall by the wayside if it's counterproductive to what Trump wants to accomplish.
We'll see. We'll see. All right, let's move on. Let's go to out of left field. I'm going to go first today. My out of left field is kind of schizophrenic because it's all over the map. But we've been watching for all these months since Donald Trump started running for office, and I talk all the time about integrity and honesty, and I watch the Trump administration and the president in general, and I rail on this all the time. And then you watch him and his Twitter feed and the things he does, the things he says, and I've been spending this last week watching the talk about John McCain. And just the other day, I caught one story, and it brought everything into focus for me. The FBI headquarters, they've been looking at moving it for the last 2 years. And there's been a government study going on about whether it should move to the suburbs in Virginia and would it be cheaper for the government. And then they decided that it would be. In come Donald Trump. And he went to 2 meetings, and they canceled it. And they decided to leave the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and tear the building down and rebuild it right there at almost double the cost. And I got to wondering why would the President of the United States get involved in something that mundane, something that small, something that little. So I looked into it. It just happens to be that the FBI headquarters is right across the street from the brand new Donald Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. And do you think for 1 minute that Donald Trump did that so that no developer could buy that property and put a hotel across the street from his and be in competition with him? That lying, cheating son of a bitch. And that's why he keeps us from looking at the things that he's doing. And that's the investigation that needs to be going on.
Shameless. Speaking of shameless, Louis C.K. Was back on stage in New York at the Comedy Cellar at the end of August, and I find that appalling. It's only been 10 months since everything that we've come to know about him, ruining careers of women comedians who didn't want to sleep with him, or sit there and watch him masturbate, or his propositioning them or rubbing against them. He's a disgusting human being, and 10 months is not enough time for him to come back and everything is just A-okay. For him to be back in on a stage making jokes and not even addressing the Me Too issue that caused him to take a little hiatus in the first place. I think there's something deeply wrong with that, and I just think, Louis C.K. can just go fuck himself for at least a little while longer.
Go ahead, Bill.
Tomorrow is Labor Day, and so many Labor Days for me were spent
I think
with my friend.
Today is Labor Day when this podcast comes out.
What now?
Today is Labor Day when this podcast comes out. But yeah.
It's his out of left field. Let him talk about it.
But today is Sunday when we're taping, and tomorrow is Labor Day. And so many of my Labor Day weekends were spent with my friend Dale Wortham. He was my labor liaison when I served as a member of Congress. He was always a supporter, but most importantly, he was always a friend. And we lost Dale a couple of years ago, and he had a greater knowledge of politics and his little pinky finger than most people would ever acquire in a lifetime. And everyone likes to point out what's bad about politics. Dale made me realize everything good about politics, how you can meet people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different walks of life, and find a common bond. And one of my favorite stories, Dale was an advisor on my congressional campaign, and he would come to the strategy meetings. And one day we were trying to determine where we could find a middle-class house in order to tape a television commercial in front of. And there was some back and forth with different suggestions. And finally Dale said, "Y'all, you're going to have to be a little more specific, because where I come from, middle class means you just don't have wheels on your home." And it made everybody stop and think a little deeper about where we were really going for our location. He was an incredible human being. He died way too soon, and I miss him every day. Happy Labor Day, everybody.
Well, that's all the time we have. And every week I say, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and rate us on iTunes. But I've been saying the wrong thing, because this is, more importantly, we need you to subscribe to our show, to What's Left America. And how do they do that, Andy? How do you subscribe to our show?
Well, you go to whatever platform, podcast platform on which you listen to us. And but what you do is, since you already are listening, you push the subscribe button.
That's it.
And it could be on iTunes or Libsyn or Spotify or
any of them.
Overcast or Downcast, and anyway,
Upcast.
the list goes on. But
any of them.
Yeah.
And
the
subscribe.
point is, you may already be a subscriber. Why don't you tell some of your friends
Tell your
about
friends
it?
to subscribe, and everybody subscribe. We need to have subscription parties to What's Left America. That's what we need, subscription parties to What's Left America. And while you're having that, then like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and rate us on iTunes. That's what we need you to do. That's all the time we have today. Be sure, and I already said all that. Much thanks to Keegan DeLeo, our in-studio producer. Have a great week.